Air Hostess slapped a black man in business class. Turns out he's a police captain. What would you do if a simple flight turned into a nightmare? An air hostess mistakenly racially profiles and slaps a black man seated in business class of a plane, only to discover he's a high-ranking police captain. This story delves deep into the raw tensions of racial profiling, systemic racism, and police brutality in modern society. The confrontation unfolds at 35,000 feet, and what happens next will leave you questioning your own assumptions and reactions to everyday injustices. Stay tuned as we uncover the shocking aftermath of this tense moment and its broader implications on how society views people of color. Have you ever wondered what happens when assumptions go too far? When someone's snap judgment spirals into chaos? And what if the victim is someone you never expected? It all started with a simple, subtle glance, a brief exchange of eyes between the air hostess and a well-dressed black man who had just stepped into business class. Who was he? Why did her gaze linger? Was it something about him that unsettled her? Or was it something deeper, something she wasn't even aware of? He calmly walked down the aisle, his face serene yet focused. He'd been looking forward to this trip for weeks. To him, this was more than a flight. It was a moment of peace, a rare break from his demanding job as a police captain in a city gripped by unrest. But to her, he didn't belong, at least not in her eyes. And that's when it happened. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice flat and cold, devoid of the usual warm tone reserved for passengers in business class. "Are you sure you're in the right section? Can I see your boarding pass?" Was there an edge of suspicion in her voice? Or was it simply her doing her job? But why only to him? Why not the other passengers? The man, calm as ever, reached into his pocket and handed over his boarding pass. She took it, eyes narrowing as she scrutinized every inch of it. Was she doubting him? Did she think he didn't deserve to be there? She muttered under her breath. "I'll be right back." He nodded, but behind his calm exterior, his mind raced. Why did he feel like he was being singled out? Was it because of his skin color? Minutes passed and the air hostess returned. Only this time, she wasn't alone. She had brought a supervisor along, whispering something into her colleague's ear while shooting wary glances toward the man. Was this some kind of joke? Were they seriously questioning him for simply being in the seat he paid for? "Sir," the supervisor said, stepping forward, "I'm afraid there's been some confusion. Can we ask you to follow us to the front of the plane? We just need to verify something." For a moment, the entire plane seemed to hold its breath. Passengers exchanged confused looks, the hum of quiet conversations dying down as eyes turned toward the man in the crisp suit who seemed to be causing such a stir. The man raised an eyebrow. "Is there a problem?" "No problem," the supervisor replied, but her tone betrayed her words. There was definitely a problem. His heart rate quickened, though his face betrayed none of it. Years of being on the front lines as a police captain had trained him to stay calm under pressure. But this was different. He wasn't the one wearing a badge here. He was the one being scrutinized, the one being judged. Was this happening because he was black? Was it because of the way he looked, the way he dressed? The assumptions people always seem to make? "Excuse me," he said, his voice firm but polite, "but I've paid for this seat. I'm not moving unless you give me a legitimate reason." The tension in the cabin grew thick. Would he be escorted off the plane? Was this going to turn into one of those viral videos where someone is dragged out against their will? The passengers watched intently, every pair of eyes on him, judging, waiting, and then, in a split second, everything exploded. The air hostess, frustrated by his refusal to comply, lost her composure. She stepped forward, her face contorted with anger and disbelief, and in a move that shocked everyone on board, she slapped him across the face. The sound echoed through the cabin like a crack of thunder. Passengers gasped. What had just happened? For a moment, everything froze. The man's face snapped to the side, his eyes wide with disbelief. Had that really just happened? Was he just physically assaulted for refusing to move from the seat he rightfully paid for? People immediately pulled out their phones, recording the scene. Questions buzzed in the air like bees. Did she really just hit him? What will happen now? The man slowly turned his head back to face her, his eyes narrowing as a storm brewed behind his calm facade. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he asked quietly, his voice a low, simmering threat. Her face paled. The smug confidence that had been there just moments before vanished in an instant. Did she know? Had she just slapped the wrong person? The atmosphere in the plane was now thick with tension. Every passenger was glued to the scene unfolding before them. The air hostess, clearly shaken, took a step back, realizing the gravity of what she'd done. But there was no undoing it now. The cameras were rolling. "I asked you a question," the man repeated, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to reverberate through the entire cabin. "Do you know who I am?" He reached into his jacket, pulling out a badge, a police captain's badge.
If you've watched this far, leave a 100 in the comments section, because you are type of person that likes to finish what they started. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to get notified whenever we drop new videos. Now back to the story.
The cabin seemed to collectively hold its breath. This wasn't just any man sitting in business class. He wasn't someone you could easily dismiss or ignore. He was a high-ranking officer of the law, a man who had likely seen more injustice than most people could imagine. And now, he was the victim. "What do you think happens now?" His words were calm, but they carried a weight that made everyone in earshot shiver. "You think you can just slap me and get away with it?" The air hostess looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. The supervisor, who had been so confident just moments before, was now stammering, trying to piece together an apology. But there was no going back. The man stood up, adjusting his suit jacket, and turned toward the passengers who were still recording. He knew those videos would go viral. This wasn't just a personal insult, it was a symbol of something much larger. A symbol of the systemic issues that had plagued society for far too long. Racism, profiling, injustice. How many others had been victims like him, but without the authority or platform to fight back? How many people had been wronged simply because of the color of their skin? He handed his badge to the supervisor. "Call the police," he said. "Let's see what they have to say about this." The plane was still grounded, the incident having unfolded before takeoff. Security soon arrived, but this time it wasn't the man in business class being taken away. It was the air hostess who was escorted off the plane, her face a mix of shame and fear. Passengers murmured among themselves. Some had been silent witnesses to the event. Others had whispered words of support or condemnation. But the man, now standing alone in the aisle, was calm once again. He didn't need to say much more. His actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. What had happened that day wasn't just an isolated incident on a plane. It was a microcosm of the larger issues that plagued society. A snapshot of the kind of profiling and racism that people of color often face, regardless of their status, their profession, or their accomplishments. As the plane finally took off, the man sat back in his seat, staring out the window as the world shrank beneath him. He wasn't just another passenger anymore. He was a symbol, a reminder that even those who protect others are not immune to the same injustices they fight against. But what would come of this? Would this moment spark a change? Would the airline be held accountable? And would people finally start asking the hard questions about the way society treats those who look different? Or would it all fade away, just another viral video lost in the endless stream of news? One thing was for sure, the world was watching now, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to spark the conversation that was so desperately needed. What would you have done if you were in that situation? Would you have stood up? Stayed silent? How many times have you seen someone wronged and done nothing? The truth is, these moments of injustice happen all the time, every day, to people just like you. But when will it stop, and what will you do the next time you see it?